There seems to be this general consensus out there that you absolutely need a flat frequency response in order to mix, right? And you have to treat your room right and do it properly and no DIY stuff, because otherwise your room is lying to you and you can't mix like that. That is the basic idea. And I get it, right? When your room or when your speakers are somehow resulting in you hearing too much or too little of a certain frequency, it might throw you off and it might cause you to cut or boost these frequencies in order to compensate for whatever your room or your speakers are telling you. And, you know, I totally understand that whole idea. And I also understand the idea that if you had a flat frequency response, you wouldn't have to compensate for anything, right? Because your room is telling you the truth. And so the solution for a lot of people is to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on monitors and room treatment and, you know, acoustic experts and room measurement software and all these things, all with the idea to flatten the frequency response as much as possible. But is that really the only solution? And is it really the best solution? Heck, is it even a problem when you don't have a flat frequency response? Because I don't think it is, and that's what this video is going to be about. Now, here's the thing. I'm not against room treatment at all. Like, I have panels up all over my mix room as well, and they're there for a good reason, which I'll get into later. But what I am fully against is this general idea that a flat frequency response is a necessity. Like, it's the only way in which you can mix professionally, and that is just flat out lies. That's a big scam. That is not true at all. Now, one of the reasons why I have strong doubts against that whole idea is because of a video that Jordan made on this channel a few years ago that was about room correction software and whether or not you need it in your room. And making that video required him to measure the frequency response in his own room back then, and this is what it looked like. Yikes, right? Completely unusable, you would say. There's a massive drop off here at 90 or 100 hertz, and then there's a massive build up at 150, and that looks to me like more than 12 dB difference here between 100 and 150 hertz. And there's massive gaps here. When you see this, it's hard to deny. Big problems definitely in Jordan's room here. And there's just, when you see this, you'd think there's just no way that you can mix like this. It's absolutely impossible. Yet Jordan actually mixed some pretty noteworthy releases while he was in this particular room, and they've all been released on major labels, and they sound huge. So that makes you really think, like, how big of a problem is this to begin with? And so, curious for answers, I watched that entire video, and what really stood out to me were these sections here.
What surprised me here is this big bump around, it's not giving me the frequencies here, but, I think it's around 140 to, 200, 300. Pretty big bump, at least to me, 6 dB around in those frequencies. That's a pretty big deal. I was pretty surprised. I was expecting to see a lot more of a flat response here.
And my biggest question there is why is Jordan so surprised about all of this, right? If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that he's not some kind of an amateur, and he's perfectly capable of judging 0.5 dB EQ moves all across the spectrum. So why did he not recognize this massive 7 dB buildup at 150 hertz and all these different gaps in the mid-range and the top end? Why did he not recognize that? And Jordan is actually giving you the answers already. He says he was expecting more of a flat curve, right? And he was surprised to find out that it's not more flat. And that is really the point here. He was expecting to see more of a flat curve there because to him, this sounds flat. Not because it is an actual flat curve, but simply because he is so used to hearing things this way that it sounds completely normal to him and it doesn't have any surprises or secrets to him at all anymore. So how could that be a problem? Like, he's so used to this amount, and therefore this massive 7 or 8 dB bump here at 150 hertz was just hiding from him all this time, and it was not throwing him off while he was mixing at all. And that is because this entire frequency curve with all its gaps and weirdness is just imprinted into his brain, really. And anything that does not quite sound like this still needs work, right? And what you're seeing here is basically his long-term audio memory in action. And all of us, we all have our own personal audio memory, and it's quite easy to recognize these memories. We have like a pretty bad short-term audio memory and a very good, well-developed long-term audio memory. And your short-term audio memory is that thing where you've been mixing for hours on a song and you think it sounds amazing, and then you come back to it the next day and you find out it sounds like total garbage. We've all been there. That is your short-term audio memory just throwing you off and playing games with you. And after you refresh that memory, after like a good night of sleep, then all of a sudden you start to recognize the errors and all that stuff. And then your long-term audio memory is that thing where if you get new speakers or if you move to a new place or something like that, somehow your brain has no problems recognizing that it sounds completely different and it's not the same as what you're used to. And you just can't help it, but you're being thrown off by that, right? And you have to take the time to adjust to all these new circumstances. So if we take that knowledge back to Jordan's situation here, his long-term audio memory is so well adjusted to this, terrible frequency response that he actually thinks and he actually expects this to be a perfectly flat frequency curve, and he's surprised to find out that it's really not, right? And if you put Jordan in like a room with a perfect flat frequency response today, that should theoretically solve all of his problems immediately, right? And it should result in perfect translation overnight, but actually in practice, the complete opposite would happen, right? Because he'd be spending weeks just getting used to that new room and getting used to that perfect curve, and it would be exactly as if he just got new monitors or moved to a new room or something like that. And his audio memory just is not adjusted to hearing things like this, right? And in the video as well, you can see that Jordan actually decides to not worry about how flat the frequency response is and instead just to rely on how well adjusted he is to his current circumstances. And that is actually the main point of this video here. Like, whether you build a room with a flat frequency response or not, ultimately, you're gonna have to spend the exact same amount of time to get used to that anyway, right? And you have to develop that long-term audio memory in that room before your mixes will translate. So you have a choice here. You can either just keep upgrading your room and your monitors and add a sub and keep adding treatment and measure things again and add software and all that stuff. In reality, constantly changing your frequency curve though and never really getting used to that. Or you realize that right now you're already somewhat used to like one of these imperfect curves right now, right? And why not just commit to going all the way with that and just getting more used to that curve? The end result is going to be the exact same, which is a system that you can trust that sounds flat to you and that translates well, right? You can kind of think of it like a good friendship, like you and a best friend. You wouldn't describe a friendship as like being super flat, right? You both have tons of problems and tons of weird quirks and whatever, and you know each other so well that none of that stuff really bothers or surprises you anymore. And then when you meet new people, you gotta have to spend all that time again and again to learn all these quirks and all their character traits and whatnot before you can actually call it a friendship. But once you spend that time getting to know somebody or getting to know your room in our case, right, you'll have a friend for life there. Now the downside to this, and it's also the reason why this is not a very popular opinion, is that it takes time to develop such a trustworthy audio memory and to get to that place where your room holds no secrets for you anymore. And that is also exactly the reason why people are spending these thousands of dollars on monitors and on treatment and all that stuff. They're basically just searching for a solution that doesn't really require any more time or effort from their side, but looking for a shortcut into getting their mixes to translate well. So instead of taking responsibility for your lack of time invested into developing skills and developing your audio memory, you just blame the gear. And you blame the room and you blame the speakers. That's way easier, right? And so they keep upgrading, but then when their mixes still don't translate because they have no solid foundation and no solid long-term audio memory to rely on, they go out and buy more panels and keep doing more measurements and adding more treatment, right? Because the room is still lying to me, and that's why my mixes don't translate. No, it's not. It's because you buy into this lie that you need a flat frequency response in order to mix, and therefore you refuse to develop your long-term audio memory, and you refuse to get so familiar with your room that it holds no secrets anymore, right? And that translation no longer is a problem. And that is the real secret here.
But Rudolf, you don't get it, man. My room is so bad, there's just no way I can make this work. Like, it is pointless to get used to this crappy room.
Now, of course, not every room is immediately suitable for mixing, right? I mean, try mixing in a big parking garage or in a big church or something like that, just to exaggerate that point. But that's where room treatment comes into play for sure. And that is also the reason why I have treated this room where I am right now. I have maybe about 10 absorption panels, something like that, up in this room here. And the goal is not to flatten the frequency response with that. In fact, I've never measured my frequency response ever. I just don't really care. But it's simply to make this room more dry sounding. And I don't want any sound to just be bouncing around here, right? Because when you're trying to judge a sound and see what it needs in a mix, but you're still like listening to the sound of a second ago, and it's just bouncing around the room, that's not going to be helpful, right? It's almost like trying to mix with a reverb plugin on your master bus. That's obviously not going to be great. And so I definitely want to hear the direct sound from my monitors as much as possible instead of the reflections. And once you have that under control, it is all about spending that time developing that long-term audio memory. And that is going to give you the exact same result as somebody with a perfectly flat frequency response. Now, I know not everybody is going to agree with what I'm saying here. Audio engineers will be audio engineers, right? And people will continue giving up responsibility to outside circumstances. And it is what it is, right? I just hope that those of you that were worried about not having a good room or a good frequency response can see this and finally let it go, right? And just realize that your room and knowing your room is much more important than whether or not it is perfect. And you can still make professional records just like Jordan and I can without going through these massive rabbit hole. It is all a matter of how you think about things and where you're going to put your focus on, right? And just realize that even if you decide to build a perfect room, you still need to develop your own personal audio memory in that room before your mixes will translate anyways. So, alright, if you dig this video and you want to see more mindset hacks for mixing, then check out this video next, and I'll see you in the next one.